What's up? Hey, y'all. Wow, this is wild. Like, being up here is so wild. I hope everyone's doing okay. It's almost the middle of the conference. It's kind of nuts being up here with my book because I debuted April 2020, which is to say I debuted into a void, and yeah, collective trauma of like people debuting in 2020. But yeah, so this is like I think my like fifth reading I was able to actually do physically in person with the book, which is wild, and just really grateful that this is the reading I get to do. I'm gonna actually start with some new poems, and then I'm gonna end with some book poems. This is a poem written through the pandemic. Me and my roommates, wait, first, can everyone hear me okay? Is it? Okay, the echo is, yeah. So me and my roommates were like during the pandemic, summer round 2, summer 2020 pandemic, we were just like, okay, we're exasperated, and we started just being like, yeah, hot nihilist summer, let's go. And just started talking to each other like, let's just get fucked and die, hashtag hot nihilist summer. I want a vampire to eat my asshole, hashtag hot nihilist summer. And so I wrote, of course, a poem in that voice. This is called Get Fucked and Die Poetica. But what if I never wanted to survive what happened to me in my poems? Some days, I just want to get stepped on by a 6-foot something with a hole for a face. Say, I'll make a chair out of you, Aries rising that I am. I yell at broken screens as beasts turn knocking the wind out of me into a kind of dance. Yes, I want another man to break me without breaking me in the light of day. If I must go, let me go, a la Matthew McConaughey's daddy. Literally got fucked and died mid-climax. It was heart failure. Love was a body of disappointments. Once, a grinder gay bit my ass, and he wasn't a vampire, just a Virgo, too worried about his tax returns to finish. Though no man can disappoint me as much as the body I was born into. Kidding, Avi, I'm chilling. I'm chilling. I'm the center of hell's ninth circle. Dante, Milton, etc. All daddies I could have wanted in another life if I didn't read whiteness as a failed canon of public existential crises. I wish my oppressors a nation of sunburns. Machine gun selfies, Eurovision, machine gun selfies, recreating the ending to Drag Me to Hell. How's that for a hot Israeli summer? Your son's boring me to death. Someday it'll have a hole for a face, then a hole for a whole body, whatever. The Big Bang is just the universe's cycle of re-unfucking itself, of an abandonment retold as origin story. Like cereal, it has no history aside from colonialism and a science that once correlated spicy foods with sex drives and masturbation. In cardboard nutrition, in sex without orgasms, America disappoints us and says, chill out, as their military besties wear cruelty-free boots, identifying as vegan-friendly while slaughtering all the disappointing bodies, saying, be diplomatic. I say, tell me how the sea tastes from that hole you once called a country, from the suffering you once thought there was an end to. I read a man that poem once and asked him to choke me with a belt afterwards. It was a promise he couldn't keep. I told y'all my body was disappointing. I told y'all love wasn't. We broke up at a candlelit dinner over poems containing bodies possessed by light. I've gifted crush to no man ever since. Can anyone understand how literal I'm being? I've always wanted to be someone people call their girly, but I don't think my body is ready for that poem. I don't think my body is ready to survive. Thank you all. Funny poems turn sad, woo! This is a poem that This is like the most recent poem I wrote, actually, just before the conference. So I'm really especially nervous doing it. It's from a second project, which is thinking a lot about death. Hello. And death, necropolitics, I guess, the interpersonal versus the collective political, thinking about the Palestinian and Palestinian-American context that I come from. A lot of this deals with my father, actually, who passed away super suddenly through the pandemic of a rare, incurable neurodegenerative disease that is, quote unquote, more likely to win the lottery than to get this disease. And so this poem is about not coming out to my father on his deathbed. An archaeology of father. Baba, I held your hand as you were dying half asleep, floating between unknowing and here, your gaze fixed into a graying wall. Half asleep, floating away from an unknowable here, your gaze was fixed past the wall, graying from hospital to hospice, to bedroom, to heaven. Here, your gaze was fixed. Past the wall, graying from hospital to hospice to bedroom, the heaven of your unforgotten youth played out before us, from hospital to hospice, from bedroom to heaven. Your unforgettable youth played out before us. 1967, summer whispering in the ferns, gator dead on the mantle. You unforgot your youth and let it play out before summer whispered the ferns dead. Gator on the mantle meant hunting season was just beginning, its heat coming still. Summer was a whisper. Ferns dead on the mantle. A gator meant hunting season was a heat you named beginning. This is how you convinced yourself you were American. I wrote heat and beginning, but meant hunting season. This is how I know I am American. I can convince other men I am worthy of their roughest entries. This is the shape of my knowing. I'm a convincing American to other men who see in me a rough entry. A worthy whole would know how to submit, how to say, Daddy. To other men, I am a rough entry, a worthy whole. I know how to submit, call Daddy undeserving men, all spittle, teeth, and thrashing, whole I once submitted to. Daddy where once was undeserving man. In all the spittle and thrashing, he was my first love, my earliest childhood friend. When I was all spittle and thrash, I thought myself undeserving of him. But being in love with my earliest childhood friend was how my body taught itself first to swallow. I once was in love with my earliest childhood friend. This is how my body first learned to swallow the impossible wound of itself. Summer quieted into whisper. I first taught my body to swallow itself as a wound scraped quiet on an impossible summer. Baba, it was you who held my hand as I was dying. I quieted the impossible wound of my body, Baba. I held your hand while you were dying, half asleep. I let you float, up, off, unknowing. Thank you all. That poem's in a form, it's called the Markov sonnet. I've experimented with it before, and in Birthright in my book. It's a poem, it's a sonnet that sort of dismembers itself. It forgets itself every 3 lines. And I'm not gonna read the others. There's a Markov sonnet in the book, but I'm not gonna read that one. Instead, I think I'm going to read a poem that I have a really troubled relationship to. And one time this was the least favorite thing I've ever written. And then it was I think, then it was my favorite thing I've ever written, and then I just oscillate back and forth, and I think it's a poem I wrote to my future self. I don't think I knew what I was saying in my body when I wrote it, and I think I needed to write to a self beyond myself at that moment, and that's kind of why I had a kind of oscillating relationship. So I don't know, ask me in a year's time and I might be like, oh, fuck that poem. But this is in response to French-Moroccan singer Manel Ibtissam. She auditioned for The Voice France with this beautiful rendition of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah in Arabic on live television, and the audition went viral. It was recorded and put on YouTube, and instantly 14 million views in a day. It was just had the whole internet, me included, weeping. And then shortly thereafter, with the publicity, with the fame, she was her social media was stalked, and she was actually doxxed and harassed by a bunch of white supremacists who found tweets of hers critiquing French Islamophobia, tweets that were pro-Palestinian, and actually they harassed her into eventually quitting the competition, despite that they're oh, she was the next forerunner and whatnot. So this is an ode to Manel Ibtissam, and this will be my last poem. 1. Poem read from right to left, as in Arabic. I've heard this song, but never in my own tongue. The way smolder and ash, if may be seen in the right mouth, can become gospel and not the fire who birthed it. There's your bluest prayer, which at its core is still flame, the minor fall of your Arabic, a flag which has failed us before. Somewhere, a country shrieks ode tremor, finds God on tenor lungs, the fourth, the fifth. Somewhere, a man builds his throne above the undoing, claims their ceaseless song and writes them into lullaby. Still earth, all marble streets empty of children who spoke brash in moonlit tongues. Yes, I've archangeled the devil from this history. Twinned the doves, bloody-handed. You ever love a country so much you'd lose your voice in its song? Somewhere, the land we learned is also the land we inherited. Every memorized contour, permanent and skyward from knot bombs, hurling back up to the metal birds they came from. Manel, teach me to love a country without unmothering another. Because you sing our history was always victory march, paradise unwinged, the revolution refused, translation in you, how its yets and alifs demand us full-throated and hollow in this, an Arabic I bleached and sent to a colonizer because so few words can keep me alive these days. English shoots cold arrows down my teeth and demands me to speak, confident like someone's broken fist didn't make a home of itself in my throat. It was first your Arabic who hallelujah'd in your own major key. Made a God worth singing to from prayer outdrew hallelujah the organ in your throat. Hallelujah, the Philistine your lungs resurrect. Hallelujah, the choir of restless dead running through you. Hallelujah, you of this earth, its wind and stone, everything, breathing, trembling at the sound of you. 2, poem read from left to right, as in English. Maybe if ash and smolder weigh the tongue, own my in never but song. This herd there's it, throat, who gospel the knot and fire become mouth. Right and seen Arabic, your fall, minor the flame still is core, at which prayer, bluest, your God finds tremor. Ode shrieks country, a somewhere before us failed, has which flag above throne builds man, a somewhere, fifth, the fourth, the lungs, tenor on all earth, still lullaby, into them writes songs, ceaseless their claims, undoing the, yes, tongues, moonlit and brash, spoke who children of empty streets marbled, ever you handed bloody doves, the twinned history, this from devil, the archangel, learned we land the somewhere song. It's in voice, your lose, so country, a love from skyward and permanent. contour memorized, every inherited we. Land also is love to me. Teach, Manel, from came they birds, metal to back, hurling bombs, not was always history ours. Sing you because another unmothering, without country, how you in translation refused revolution, unwinged paradise, marched victory to scent and bleached eye Arabic, and this hollow and full-throated us demands alifs, and yet it shoots English these days. Alive me keep, can words fuse, so because colonizer, a somebody like confident, speaks to me, demands and teeth. My down arrows, cold, your Arabic, your first, was it throat? My internet self, a home, make didn't fist broken out, drew prayer from singing Wurth, God a maid, key, major A, and hallelujah throat. Your in organ, the hallelujah resurrect, your Palestine, the hallelujah you, through running dead, restless choir, the hallelujah of stone and wind, it's earth, this of you, hallelujah, you of sound. Trembling, breathing, everything. 3, poem read down the left margin to be sung in Manel's voice. Maybe there's a God above. All I've ever learned from love was how to shoot somebody who outdrew you. 4, poem read down the right margin to be sung in Manel's voice. I've seen your flag on the marble arch. Love is not a victory march. It's a cold, broken hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Thank you all. Up next, I have the insane pleasure of introducing Tiana Clark.
Wow, George, that was incredible. Good afternoon. I want to thank Leah and Adam and Gwen and all the incredible staff, especially B and Ananda, who helped me move all of my clothes without judgment. I've been on this mountain, I think this is my 8th summer, and it means a lot to me both professionally and personally. And I also just want to thank you, Leah, and this kind of new movement of Swanee for acknowledging what's happened on this land and the racism of this land, especially in the history of Swanee, which makes me think about a quote from Terrence Hayes, where he said, "What a miraculous thing for the descendants of slaves to become poets." So I wasn't going to read anything actually from my first book. It was interesting, I was here in 2016 as a scholar, 2 years before my book came out. And at the very last moment, I decided to read this one poem, and it was so interesting, George, to hear you talk about writing a poem to a future self, where you don't know exactly what it means. And this poem, Rituals, I'm about to read to you, it's a poem that at the very last minute, I asked my publisher if I could put it in, and I didn't really know why I felt like it needed to be there, because it didn't really fit the tone of the book. But now, looking back, it definitely was a bridge to my next collection. And it reminds me of this quote from Adrienne Rich, one of my favorite poets, where she writes, "Poems are like dreams. In them you put what you don't know, you know." Rituals, which begins with a quote from Stuart Dybek. "What does it matter? We made not doing it a wonder." The most dangerous game for me is sex and syntax. Your hand, so familiar and terrifying as family, reaches for my name, and then my navel, which is a cup of hunger. Always in that order, my hand drags after loss, after some inexact past. The wet mood lingers erotic with the scent of a half-peeled orange, broken by a nasty thumbnail. The moment clicks and disappears again before we attempt release. This hardened honey, this slow drip of joy. Another spider approaches and then I smash it, smearing gorgeous little guts like black lotion. Strange how desire is greedy and silent in stasis. Strange how two bodies can grow without branches. And again, how do you diagram two broken bodies without parsing, without penetration? Is this still what I want? Another year, another sip of good bourbon, neat and decadent. Something like a lock unlatches. Another hard world approaches without water. Another hard world approaches without fur. Another hard world approaches and approaches without punctuation, enters without sucking salt from these two bodies, starved and pulsating on the brink of so much touching and not touching. I ache for grammar when it's bent and fluid. I ache for him, for her, and then for myself, always in that order, last in lust. I hum, I bang, I bite, I touch myself, my many selves. If I whimper, can I call it God? Oh God, please delay the verbs. Once in bed, you finally gave me what I wanted, but I didn't want it anymore. The whipped cream slid from your cool nipples and strings of white tears. See, I'd already eaten so much sugar that day. I was so full and sick of it. Self-portrait at divorce. The day my husband left, I accidentally set off the house alarm, and the dog finally curled into my chest like a warm croissant of cream fur, and you had replaced the trash bag for the last time, and the recycling, and I walked into your office, and I wept and wept inside your pillow on our bed. Whoops, I mean my bed, a California king, our biggest bed yet, because we wanted space for our long bodies to stretch and room for the dog to splay, and I put water in the dog bowl, and I told myself that I had to remember to do that because you had always done that simple task, and you often reminded me to do it when I forgot. I didn't want our dog to die of thirst, and you left a cup of water on the end table by the couch we had picked out the year before. We just walked into an Ashley furniture store on a Saturday and sat on the first fake living room set, and we said, this is us, like we knew what we wanted. But we did that day. We did, and it was easy, which was rare for us. And I put your last cup of water to my mouth, and I guessed where your mouth might have been on the rim, and I pressed my lips to the glass. You always said I had the nicest lips, like two pillows, you said. And I kissed the cup and poured out the rest of the water into the sink, and it wasn't an offering to anything. And I put the cup in the dishwasher, and I started to tremble, and the house smelled like it was a train, but it was just the actual train that rumbles behind our house, my house. And you called and told me you went to the hospital for chest pains, and I wasn't with you at the walk-in clinic, but you said I was still your emergency contact, and I slept on the couch that night because I didn't want to sleep in my big bed, and I wanted to grovel my way back to the complacency of us, and I wanted to grasp at the stomach of anyone, and I wanted the almost happy home we had, and I wanted to end the poem with gladness instead of the sound of the knife drawer opening and closing, music of metals and cabinet wood jingle, and the clink of steel blades and measuring spoons wrestling against their edges and contours, and I didn't harm myself because I didn't want to harm myself. I wanted to feel the negotiation of pain besides the present pain, and I wanted the body's pain to come, but I didn't do it, okay? I just thought about it, and I think I'm proud of myself today for sitting down inside the empty well of grief and looking up. I always forget to look up, and I keep walking into each room staring at the objects that we bought together, remembering fights at Target, laughter at Target, splitting up and conquering a to-do list at Target, and those little zapper guns they gave us at Target when we registered for our wedding gifts. And I haven't showered in days. I have a sourness to me, and the lids of my eyes are swollen like tiny beige water balloons from all the sobbing, and I didn't do it, okay? I didn't. And I still want joy at the end. But the day my husband moved out, it felt like the first real day of fall because it was. I like the way Josh says Black love is radical. Tonight, I went to the park again because I couldn't stop crying. I don't remember my dreams, and when I do, someone is always dying. Someone is always grabbing my arm when I wake up. Once, I woke to my own bite marks on my bicep. Tonight, my friend Josh said he did not exist in his own romantic imagination, and I felt a zap of acknowledgement dip through my chest like a tiny black bat skittering the delicate lake for little bugs. Tonight, I wanted to ask a better question but couldn't, so I told Josh why I wanted to live instead. Tonight, wherever the sunset smeared the pink ghost in the sky from dusk to dust and other kinds of dreamy darknesses. Tonight, I'll probably call my ex-husband and say nothing, then hang up. I'll open the fridge and say nothing too. I'll take one more bite of tiramisu. What a delightful word. You kind of have to sing to say it. Proof. I once made a diorama from a shoebox for a man I loved. I was never a crafty person, but found tiny items at an art store and did my best to display the beginning bud of our little love, a scene recreating our first kiss in his basement apartment, origin story of an 8-year marriage. In the dollhouse section, I bought a small ceiling fan, recreated his black leather couch, even found minuscule soda cans for the cardboard counters that I cut and glued. People get weird about divorce, think it's contagious, think it dirty. I don't need to make it holy, but it purifies. It's clear. Sometimes the science is simple. Sometimes people love each other but don't need each other anymore, though I think the tenderness can stay if you want it to. I forgive and keep forgiving mostly myself. People still ask what happened. I know you want a reason, a caution to avoid, but life rarely tumbles out a cheat sheet. Sometimes nobody is the monster. I keep seeing him for the first time at the restaurant off the West End where we met and worked and giggled at the micros. I keep seeing his crooked smile and open server book fanned with cash before we would discover and enter another world and come back barreling to this one, astronauts for the better and for the worse, but still spectacular as we burn back inside this atmosphere to live separate lives inside other shadow boxes we cannot see. I remember I said I hate you once when we were driving back to Nashville, our last long distance. I didn't mean it. I said it to hurt him, and it did. I regret that I was capable of causing pain. I think it's important to implicate the self. The knife shouldn't exit the cake clean. There is still some residue, some proof of puncture, some scars you graze to remember the risk. I'm going to switch to a bird poem. I stare at a cormorant. I stare at a cormorant with its waterlogged wings spread open, drying off in a rock in the middle of a man-made lake after diving for food, and it makes me think about wonder, and it makes me want to pry and stretch my shy arms open to the subtle summer wind slicing through the park, sliding over my skin like a stream of people blowing candles out over my feathery body, and it makes me think about my church when I was a kid, and how I lifted my hands to Jesus, hoping for surrender, but often felt nothing, except for the rush of fervent people wanting to be delivered from their aching present pain, and how that ache changed the smell in the room to money, and how I pinched my face, especially my eyes tighter, reached my hands higher, how I, like the cormorant, stood in the middle of the sanctuary, so exposed and open, and wanted so much to grasp the electric weather rushing through the drama of it all, like a shout in the believer's scratchy throat. I don't go to church anymore, but today I woke up early and meditated. I closed my eyes and focused on a fake seed in my hand and put my hands over my heart to shove the intention inside my chest to blossom. I'm still stumbling through this life, hoping for anyone or something to save me. I'm still thinking about the cormorant who disappeared when I was writing this poem. I was just looking down and finishing a line, and then I looked back up. Gone. This will be my last poem. I don't normally write poems off of the current news cycle. I think poems, for the most part, should ferment in darkness. However, a publication reached out to me in early June, kind of knowing that the decision with Roe v. Wade would be overturned, and asked if I wanted to respond. And I immediately was writing back to say no. And as I was writing the email, the strange thing happened where the poem started coming to me as I was also declining this offer. I was teaching at this time, and I was teaching about the role of the epistle and kind of this collision between a public and private conversation. And I was thinking about modulating that idea of addressing an idea with kind of cycling through metonymy and moniker. And so as I was declining this solicitation, and the poem also started kind of unspooling. And so this is considering Roe v. Wade, Letters to the Black Body. Dear highest price, dear bear the brunt and double blow, dear Gila cells still doubling, dear disproportionately impacted, dear Archana without anesthesia during surgery with SIMS, dear Fanny and the Mississippi appendectomies with a sick and tired ceaseless sonnet crown, dear Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis, dear Black American women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women, to all the Black babies sliced from rich women's bellies, spilling Black jelly then burned as crackled wood, singing singe under silent white starlight, dear unbelief pain, dear thick skin myth, and yet Black skin must be thicker. Dear Black slaves chewing a brew of cotton roots as a form of reproductive resistance, even when threatened with death, the body strikes. Dear alum water, teaspoon of turpentine, rue, camphor, and chugging gunpowder mixed with sweet milk. Dear Black body that I adore, dear Black body that I now listen to shimmering with acute tenderness, look at my mother's hands, how they search and cut the thread to take out my weave as if deadheading Black finished blooms from my scalp. What survives in us is us. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Erika T. Wurth.
So I first wanted to thank the organizers of this workshop because I do a much more diminished form of this where I teach, and I know it's a pain in the butt. It's just a pain in the butt, is what I'm trying to say. And so I so appreciate all the efforts that go through scheduling and emailing and dealing with emails and dealing from my desperate emails, so thank you so much. And I also wanted to say it's such an honor for me to work with Holly Goddard Jones. I have admired her work for years and years and years. I've taught her first collection of short stories for my intermediate and advanced fiction for years, and The Salt Line is one of these science fiction or speculative novels that is just mind-blowingly good, and it just stays with me forever. It will stay with me forever is what I'm trying to say. I'm going to read a really short series of excerpts from my forthcoming novel, White Horse. It's an indigenous literary horror novel about Carrie, and she's an urban Indian woman who, has always hated her mother for, as she sees it, abandoning her, but her super white, super well-intentioned cousin gives her this bracelet of her mother's, and as soon as she touches it, her mother starts to haunt her. She starts to be haunted in her dreams by this monster, and she decides, maybe I should find out what really happened to her. This is from chapter 18. The roller coaster shrieked above us, the sound of rusty metal making contact with more rusty metal, simultaneously exciting and terrifying, the screams of the people on the coaster joining the teeth-jattering screech as it came to a pinnacle and plunged. Lakeside was the poor man's Elitch's. Elitch's, or if you wanted to be fancy about it, Elitch Gardens, had opened all the way back in 1890 on 16 acres of former farmland, the first zoo west of Chicago, relocating to the tune of $90 million goddamn dollars to a brand new downtown location in the mid-90s with rides like the Mind Eraser and Tower of Doom, though I had to admit the Sea Dragon was my personal favorite. Lakeside had an equally prestigious beginning. Opening in 1908, not long after Elitch's, it was called White City on account of its neoclassical buildings in white plaster of Paris. Unlike its more magnificent twin, which managed at one point relationships with companies as American as DC Comics, Lakeside, like old Denver, has slid, rusting gently, into Denver's past, my past. Walking through Lakeside is moving into a bygone era. The beach, casino, theater, racetrack, all marvels in their day, gone. The faded yellow entrance with Lakeside in cursive, yellow and orange sunbeams shooting out of the lettering is peeling, and the building has not been the bright white of the past for many, many years. But my past was there, a past that belonged in a city that in ways no longer existed. I'd come here as a teenager, my lithe, angry body caught between metal parts, moving up and down in different directions, pinching my arms, legs, my mind swirling with alcohol and promise. Debbie and I had spent the 80s as young girls eating cotton candy and throwing balls at impossible targets shaped like spirals or clowns, flirting with boys with our eyes, lying to Sandy about where we'd been, who we'd talked to. But it was places like these that had shown the divide between my life and Debbie's. When I hit 13, I was already a woman in body and mind. I was a parking lot kid, ditching and getting high not far from the school in some metalhead's car, not giving a fuck about my grades in math or English. But Debbie, only 5 years my senior, was studious. She was in her last year of high school from my first year of junior high, and though she loved me, she didn't approve of my lifestyle, and in her quiet way, she made it known. There were many years in which she was just my cousin, and what furthered the divide was the fact that we looked nothing alike. Her shy, quiet hellos in the shadows of the hallways, my, oh, she's my cousin, to confused looks from my friends, were our only interaction for years. The next is from a section I'm calling a series of poetic flashbacks. And I guess the trigger warnings are adult language, but I think we're past that point. And just, kind of intensely sexual material. Past that point, too. Thank you. Thank you, you too. I am 13 years old when I tell my best friend to get the fuck out of my house. I gleefully popped my cherry early that year in the basement of a house on an old mattress, wine sick, but ready to get this part of my life over with. I remember there had been a toy truck underneath me as he came. I flung it into the darkness, listening to a child crying somewhere in the distance, sounding lost. Jamie and I were drunk on the whiskey and cokes conned from men we'd chatted up in a bar in Denver. We'd hitched one Saturday night, ready for adventures of the kind that could not be had in a small town that sat at the bottom of a mountain, the trees swaying above our trailers, our dingy houses, our wild, furious hearts. We had told the men at the bar that we were in our 20s, and they had laughed and said they'd love to buy us drinks, love to take us home. I'd been drawn to the taller one because he'd been wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt. I thought that band had gotten a little soft, but they were Jamie's favorite, and I still liked what this minor metalhead and his friend, who laughs like a donkey, seemed to be offering. What they were offering, experience. Even at that age, I'd learned that I liked to work my way in slow, though I was never what you call subtle. I knew what I wanted, and they had it. A little cash, enough for drinks, packs of cigarettes poking out of their tight, slightly dirty jeans, the hint of an adventure that held just a little bit of danger. If I was honest with myself, it was especially the last thing. This was the time that I learned to test myself, test my limits, find out what I could do and come back from, what I could do and survive. I had decided that we would go home with them when one of them asked me what it was like to live in Idaho Springs. There was something about his tone, mocking, superior, cruel even. Up until then, we'd been having a great time, bonding over metal, arguing, my long brown hand slamming playfully down on the arm of the man who'd been supplying us with cigarettes all night. I'd been wondering what his thighs looked like under those tight jeans, what it would be like to get on top of them. What do you mean by that? I asked, my eyes going flat as a cat's. He blinked rapidly. He was dark-eyed, tall, long-haired. I remember thinking when we first let them approach us, that he was the kind of man I would have wanted as a boyfriend if I was the kind of person who would ever want that. Even then, I knew that wasn't for me, that there were some things better left untouched. He said, well, it's just Idaho Springs is full of white trash. Sorry, you're cool though. I'd closed my eyes then, and when I opened them, he was looking at me like he'd just handed me something beautiful, like a dime bag or roses. Do I look like trash to you? I asked. He stammered. Shit, I wasn't even white. I lit a smoke and squinted up at him, Jamie babbling nervously in the background, my hand fluttering behind me, trying to shut her up. His friend told me I looked like a hot piece of ass. I am a hot piece of ass, I said. He laughed he laughed his donkey laugh. You laugh like a donkey, I said. His mouth clapped shut and then a minute later opened again with, you trash bitch. I smiled and his friend told us both to cool it, cool it. He said that's not what I meant and that there was good shit at his place and we should just forget about what he said. I told him I couldn't forget, but that he should remember that trash rejected him. He shrugged, knowing it was over. I grabbed Jamie's hand and pulled. She was angry with me, told me to calm down, Carrie, said the guy said they hadn't meant it, that we should go home with him and have some fun. I told her dead-eyed that she'd be going home with him on her own then, and then stopped toward the exit, smoking as I did. A few minutes later, she was beside me, pouting. I started walking, my thumb out. I told her to have some fucking dignity. She was silent. We found a ride, a truck that was going west. It dropped us off at the outskirts of the city, the place where the grasslands began to meet in the mountains, and eventually we found a ride going all the way to the springs. But it took a while, our thumbs out in the dark, not far from the mountains where a boy had been killed by a lioness, worried for her cubs when he went jogging past, too close. I didn't speak to her the whole way, just smoked and smoked, glad I'd pulled the pack off the table before I'd left. When we got back, she told me that we should just forget about it, go back to my place, stay drunk. She had some tequila in her bag that she lifted from a liquor store. We walked past the empty streets, next to the beat-up Victorians, the shacks, the shadows long, the kids asleep who went to sleep, the others, like us, just maybe getting started. There was something sad and small and yet almost otherworldly about Idaho Springs, like there were secrets in the cold, rocky ground that might spring up at any time and take you down with them into the dark. I have one last super short, more action dialogue-oriented piece. And it really shows like why this is a horror novel, not just like, a little bit of sprinkle of speculative concept. No, it's like a full-on hack, like shit goes down, And I think this part's kind of fun. I think I was out a few hours before I heard something at the edge of my consciousness and stirred. I sat up sharply. Someone was in my room. My breath short, I tried to let my eyes adjust to the moonlight. I heard a sound. My eyes darted. The hair on the back of my neck spiked. It was coming from the bathroom. Oh shit, I whispered, thinking about the slutty zombie. It's in the Stanley. So if you like Stephen King's The Shining, this may be your jam. My eyes adjusted, and what I saw, I fucking couldn't believe. It wasn't the bathroom. It was the huge wooden arch in between the bedroom and the bathroom. The Indian carving, the one I hadn't seen from the book or the movie, the one featuring Apaches. It was moving. I sat up. The figures, both the male and the female, were looking at me, right at me, and they were gesturing for me to get up, a low whispering in Apache as they did. I'd taken an online course in Chiricahua years ago, and it was close enough to the Navajo I heard spoken around me growing up to know what it was, if not exactly what they were saying. But then I heard it. They were saying my name, whispering amongst other words. Carrie, they whispered. Oh shit, I repeated sharply. I knew what they wanted. They wanted me to come to them. My heart thudding, I got up and started walking towards the wooden figures, praying to Dave Mustaine, she's a metalhead, that whatever they wanted, it wasn't bad. It didn't feel bad. I stood by the arch, and the minute I stopped, the whispering ceased, and the woman in the forefront of the carving looked right at me and pointed. I followed her finger, and there was a beam of moonlight shining directly on a part of the carving. The carving was of a mandala with the 4 directions, a star at the top, a symbol for water at the bottom, and on one side the sun and mountains, the other the moon and arrows. Carrie, I heard, and looked over. She was still pointing. Following my instinct, I pushed on the mandala, and wood began to separate from wood, the mandala part moving outwards. When it stopped, I looked in. There was something in there, in a hollow space that had been carved out of the wood. I couldn't see it, though. It was buried in shadows. I wondered if this shit was like Dune, and I'd reach in there, and there'd be pain. Or maybe spiders. Carrie, she whispered. The oval started to move back in, and quick, I put my hand inside and felt around. It was an object of some sort, and it was stuck. It was long, whatever it was, and made of stone and wood. I struggled to get it out as the oval began to close, frustration circling my heart, terror that whatever this was, it was meant for me, and I was going to lose it. I pulled, worried I'd break it. Finally, my hands curved around the object and pulled it out, right as my hand would have been squished under the closing wood. I stared at what was in my hand. It was an Apache war club.